Welcome to the LWVC Advocacy Teach It and Tune-Up program for 2022. We have a very large number of people who are joining us today. So we're just going to take a few minutes while we're letting people in. We already have some close to 90 people in the room, but it looks like we will expect nearly 200 people. I'm Gloria Chun-Hu. I am the Vice President for Advocacy for the LWVC Board, and I'll be moderating today's program. A couple things I want to say very quickly, and the question was asked, I noticed in chat. This program is being recorded. It will be available as well as all of the slides. I will note that this is something a bit of an experiment. Generally, we do an all-day, full-day seminar covering all of the topics that we will attempt to include in today's seminar. So we are squeezing and condensing it all into 2.5 hours. It's a long webinar for most of you, so hang in there. We do have a break scheduled. All of you should have received an email from Andrew earlier today. If not, we'll also be sent the same materials we sent again to you after the seminar, but we sent to you a link to many of the resources that we're going to be talking about and all of the websites that we will refer to today. So you don't have to take notes. You don't have to worry about it because you will receive that in an email from us. And this virtual binder, our advocacy binder, is sort of key to all the work we do and what we'll be talking about today. We have over 100 participants in. We're still waiting a few more minutes, and I just urge your patience while we wait maybe a couple more minutes as more people can stream in. We also urge that you hold your questions. We will have time at the end for questions. I am going to suggest and urge that we don't use chat or Q&A or chat for a lot of information because it tends to be disruptive. Except for some materials that if you have any technical problems or our wonderful league state president, Cameron Goodberg, is helping us monitor that, and she will try to respond to your needs along with Andrew. So we'll start in just a few minutes. Please be patient. I will note again, if you've just joined us, that this is being recorded. It will be available as well as all of the links and all of the references and resources that we refer to you. Again, reiterating that this is kind of an experiment for us at the State League. We usually do a full day training for our advocacy team, and we're condensing this into 2.5 hours. So it's going to be jam-packed. We'll move very quickly, but do not worry. There'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions, and you will have all of these resources at your fingerprints. I will say something also about today's material. This material for our teach-in and tune-up is designed for those who are on the state advocacy team, those who serve as legislative analysts, and league members who work with us on advocacy. We opened it up and we welcome those of you who are new to the league, new to advocacy, new to action, that you might learn something today as well. But this is designed specifically to help people who are following state legislation, and members of the statewide advocacy team, our leg analyst, and our team. All right, I'm getting word that we should get started. Again, welcome. I think I made all my opening comments. I want to thank you very much for making the time to be with us today. Let's take a look at the next page. This is the agenda. I've done some welcome and introductions. I hope you noted on the first slide that there are 4 of us who will be making presentations. I'm joined later by Dora Rose, our Deputy Director. She'll be talking about Advocacy 101. I'll also be talking about that as well. Andrew Hughes-Fisher, our Trudy Schaefer Advocacy Fellow, who has just been an amazing person to join the advocacy staff. He is on staff along with Dora. He'll be talking about the legislative process, the intricacies and the mechanics of how legislation moves throughout the state legislature. We'll have some time after this first section for some questions about these two processes. At 7 o'clock or 7:10, we will do a 10-minute break, an opportunity for you to can leave the Zoom on, turn off, walk away and refresh yourself, do a few jumping jacks, go and use the restroom, get a drink. We'll come back and talk a little bit about the mechanics of how we do in the League of Women Voters our legislative analysis, how to track and read a bill, and as well as, and that's really an important piece of how we do our work, because the legislative analysis is critical and key to how we do our work in terms of action and how we make decisions. And so how we do that is really important. And then Susan Rose, who is our Area Director for Social Policy, will join us for helping us think about how to be better at writing these legislative analysis. And then we'll do a wrap up and open up for questions. So we do have time designed for answers and questions. Next slide, please. So a little bit about Advocacy 101 in the League of Women Voters. This may seem preliminary, but it's really a good opening and reminder about how we do advocacy. Dora and I will be talking about how we arrive at positions and the differences between partisan and political. We'll talk about the importance of speaking with one voice, how we choose bills that we analyze, and the structure of our advocacy team, especially for those of you who are new to the process. Next slide. So, important piece for all of us to remember is that we do not take action in a vacuum. We can only advocate and take action when we have a position. And those of you who are newer to the League, a position is a place that we come to after having done a thorough bit of research and study. It's a position of where we want us to be, or where we hope to take our social positions. We study both issues and develop policy positions so that it provides us the basis for action. It clarifies exactly what it is that the League supports and what we want to do. I encourage all of you, it's one of the best things I've ever done at my local League level was to participate in a study process. We've also done them at the statewide level as well. And when you have a chance, you may want to take a look and remind yourselves about the League study process, and there is a link to how that happens and the steps that's taken. But it provides a great way for League members to learn about a subject, to become very oriented to the nuances of a subject or an issue, and then based upon that, a position is developed, which is reviewed and taken to convention, and it is larger League membership. Now we have positions at multiple levels, and we'll talk about that a bit more later, because we have League positions at both the national, the state, and of course you may have local positions in your area. Next slide, please. We have a great many positions, and I encourage all of you to take a look at the materials that we provide links to in terms of what all our League positions are. It's the basis for, and we use these positions for making decisions about how we act on legislation and ballot measures. It's a League position is a statement of policies that we believe are ideal. This is where we hope to take us to. This is what we want. It may not be what is currently existing. And so we look at ballot positions and we look at bills to see how they work against where we hope to take things. And the analysis that is done on each bill or measure is to take a look at what it is, what it will change, and how that fits with our positions. And that determines whether we end up supporting or opposing a piece of legislation or ballot measure. We may decide in the process that that legislation, that bill, takes us only so far. And we might want to decide to suggest some changes or amendments to it. And the League has been known to do that and work very carefully, sometimes behind the scenes, to suggest those changes. It really is, it's really rare that there is any bill, I would say, that is perfect as it's presented. So we look at it very carefully. We're sometimes aware of some of its limitations, but sometimes it does move us forward in taking us to where we want to be. Very broadly, let us say that in the state level, we sort of divide our work into three areas. The areas are government, social policy, and natural resources. And so that helps us understand the kinds of different areas we have. And when we're looking at a bill, we look at it from multiple ways. Our positions, we may have a position in criminal justice, but we may also have a position on education, and so we may look at the two. Let us say it's a bill that talks about rehabilitation in the criminal justice in prisons, or and so we might have an education look at it. We might have it take a look at it from a perspective also of our racial justice position, and so we have to take a look at things from a multiple ways. I know, for example, a good one would be a water bill. You know, the issues of water are different from the north, the central, and the south. So we have to look at it from a statewide position. Let's take a look now at, as I said, that we have many positions, but they are also at many levels. We have positions, for example, in government that are at the national level, at the state level as well. And so we consider all of these positions. And it's important to be familiar with them, and that provides a basis for action. And now, even at the local level, these positions are very helpful. So these are how we determine whether or not we can take action. And if we have no position, we will not take any action. Next slide, please. A really important piece is for all of us in our work, and as we work with others, especially outside of the League of Women Voters, to remind folks that the League is a political organization. We work to have changes in our state, in our government, through legislation, and through the public policy process, through legislation, ballot measures. And sometimes we've been known to take lawsuits and also to examine regulations, and we advocate on issues. So that's how we are political. The other piece, which is something that sometimes is a little hard for people to understand, is we have to hold our elected officials accountable. This is not a partisan issue, but this is about accountability for an elected official. In the area where we are particularly nonpartisan, and this is really, really important, we never support or oppose political parties or candidates for office. Sometimes we hear from members that we seem to be more focused on simply education. We in the League of Women Voters wear two hats. The hat that is about voter education, and then the other hat is about our political process and our positions. We advocate on a broad range of topics, from housing to climate change to voting rights. And so we do many things, and we seek to make change happen that will make us a better society and a better country. Nonpartisanship has been key since the very beginning of the League of Women Voters, and it is very key that others understand this. There are other organizations, some of them nonprofit, they actually tend to sometimes be very partisan. And I think the gold standard for the League is that we're not. While we may hold an elected official accountable, we never take a partisan stand. We never endorse or support them in terms of their election. So, but that's really clear. Another component, next slide, is when we take action is that we speak with one voice. I cannot emphasize this more. Sometimes some of you will notice in legislation that there will be support from, let us say, an organization that represents so-and-so nonprofit from, and there'll be a city. We don't do that. On a state measure, we speak with one voice, and this is a really key tenet for the League. It allows us to be very powerful and consistent. When we take a position, it is to ensure that we have just one voice representing the entire state. The National League is responsible for determining strategies and action policies for the League messages on any national issues, and we must be consistent with it, which is why we don't speak out on national level without checking through with national. State leagues, meanwhile, are responsible for everything that happens here. So everything in California that is state related must come through the state office. And this is really important. It makes us have a much stronger voice. Now, individuals and local leagues might feel differently on a particular issue, but they cannot speak out on it in the name of the local league, and you're always encouraged local voices, but not as a league member. We encourage you as local leagues to determine action on local matters and have a set of your own positions related to your local matters. And you will be the organization to speak for your league, not individuals, but your local league. So this is a really important tenet. The more and more I am with league, the more and more I recognize how really important that is. And so therefore we have a consistent voice, and it's a voice that is very powerful because we speak with one voice. Next, I want to ask Dora to come in now to talk a little bit about bill selection. Dora?
Good evening, everybody. So given that there are so many bills introduced every cycle, there were almost, I think, 5,000 in the last 2-year session, the one that went from 2019 to 2020. How do we reduce the number that we're considering, right? We can't take positions on 5,000 bills. We can't take positions on 1,000 bills. So once we find a bill, there are criteria that we apply to determine if it's worth analyzing. And once it's analyzed, if it's worth taking a position on. So I think our threshold criteria are our league priorities. And our overarching priorities are set by members at convention every 2 years. And then every year, the board hones our focus to set priorities that are geared toward focusing on what's going on in the legislature in real time so that we can respond in a timely way as issues come up. And then, of course, core issues of the league that include things like redistricting, elections, initiative and referendum process, voting rights, campaign finance reform. Those things are always going to be priorities. They're kind of our bread and butter. And then in addition, we look at program area priorities set by our positions, right? Those priorities are actually in the positions themselves. Does the legislation have a significant impact on people's lives? That's something we look very closely at. A big part of that is actually whether or not it addresses inequities in our society, whether it moves the ball forward in terms of meeting the needs of California's underrepresented communities, and also whether it actually works to empower those communities to participate in the democratic process. We look at whether we have sufficient capacity, right? Our expertise on the matter is important. Whether we have time, whether we have the capital to fund work on the issue. We look at very closely at whether or not our leadership and our participation makes a difference to the issue. Can we sort of move the needle? And even if it's important and we all care about it, does the league voice actually make a difference? Is this where we should sort of, put our resources? Is our participation important to maintaining or developing a deeper, broader, inclusive partnership with organizations that we're cultivating relationships with because it helps us move forward the cause of underrepresented people in California? That's a big question that we ask ourselves when we're determining whether or not to take a position on a bill. We always look at whether or not we have a local league that wants to take action on a state issue. If the state issue is referred to us by a local league, there's a particularly important reason for us to take action on it for that local league. Then we look at that very closely. And finally, is it important to the league's brand or reputation for us to be public in our support or opposition to a particular piece of legislation? Also factors in. So these are all the things that we use to determine whether or not we're going to take a position on a particular bill. And we can have the next slide now. Okay, so I want to take a few minutes to explain the advocacy team structure. You can find job descriptions for all of these roles on our advocacy dashboard, and I urge you to check that out. Now, the only person on this chart who is not a volunteer is the deputy director, me. The deputy director and my on-board counterpart, the vice president of advocacy, who's Gloria Chanhu right now. Together, we manage the work of area directors to facilitate the legislative committee's work. Decisions regarding how much advocacy to do on a particular bill, that's left up to staff and our executive director, and it's made according to the capacity that we have and to the priorities that we have. The legislation committee is a group that meets monthly during the leg session to review the analyses that are done by legislative analysts. I'll talk more about that in a moment. They make the final decision as to whether to support, to oppose, or to take no action on the bill. And it's at this stage that competing analyses from different positions are going to be considered. Sort of, that's where all of the overarching thought goes into our consideration of the bill. The committee also makes non-binding recommendations to the whole league board for action on ballot measures, also using the kind of analyses that are created for bills for that purpose as well. And whenever action's taken, that's actually reported to the board and to the membership through the bill status report that's posted on the league website. You can find it on our website under the legislation and bills header. And by the way, that bill status report, it's updated in real time. And all our position letters are linked to in it. So you can have very clear visibility into the work that we're doing. Next slide, please. Okay, ledge analysts. Our ledge analysts are, they're on the front lines of the advocacy team, and it's usually where a volunteer would start. And if there are folks online who are interested in joining the team, that's most likely where you guys would start. They're going to begin by developing some expertise in a narrow subject area that's related to certain positions. And their main job is to analyze bills that the position director is either approved or assigned for analysis, and to make a recommendation as to the position that the league should take. Those analyses are what the legislation committee reviews to determine whether to take a position on a bill. Ledge analysts follow legislation until the bill either dies or it's signed by the government. Along the way, they write letters of support or opposition. They update their analyses every time there's an amendment. They update and reissue letters every time the bill moves to a new stage of the process. And they keep the position directors informed if any other advocacy is warranted. For example, testifying, lobbying, or action alerts. And that's something that's done by staff. And we'll talk about that more in a few slides as well. Next slide, please. So position directors have responsibility for one or more position in a particular advocacy area. And they should have a very proficient understanding of the relevant league positions and the legislative landscape that they're working in. So they perform sort of a hybrid role of managing the work of ledge analysts if the area requires them. Sometimes we actually don't have ledge analysts in particular areas. We only have a position director who's doing the actual work and all of the analyses. And they also provide subject area and technical expertise to the ledge analysts. They help look over reports of pending legislation that the staff that we provide at the beginning of legislative session. And they make recommendations to the area director on bill triage after looking at those lists of legislation that is relevant to their issue area. They assign bill analyses and letter drafting to ledge analysts, and then they review those analyses for accuracy and for clarity. They provide mentorship, right, and consultation support to ledge analysts. They identify gaps in coverage that we have on a team. They communicate those gaps to the area director, and they help out with recruiting new team members. Position directors also facilitate communication between ledge analysts and area directors. So, we have that back and forth communication that easily flows. And they monitor and they sometimes direct the activity of committees, of interest group. What we used to be called committees, but we are now calling interest groups that have been formed in a certain position area, which we'll talk more about in just a minute. And we can forward with the slide. All right, so area directors, they manage the advocacy team's work in each of three areas that Gloria mentioned earlier: government, social policy, natural resources, right? Currently, Helen Hutchison and I co-direct government area. Diz Swift is the area director for natural resources, and Susan Rice is our area director for social policy. And because that area is so broad, there are so many positions under social policy, Susan has two deputy area directors working with her, April Oquenda and Ashley Ravichet, and each of them has a distinct portfolio of positions that they help to manage. So area directors and their deputies have an overarching understanding of league positions and also the legislative landscape in the relevant area. That's a kind of a huge thing to really understand all of the positions in the areas. They have a voting seat on the ledge committee, and deputy area directors, they attend meetings, but they don't vote. So an important aspect of the volunteer area director job is to maintain those channels of communication that I spoke about before, to sort of facilitate a feedback loop among the other team members, including collecting the information about what bills are being analyzed and relaying that to the deputy director and the vice president of advocacy. So that's how it sort of moves up the chain, all that information. They evaluate competing priorities in their areas, and they use that to work with their position directors on the bill triage. They understand that we're not going to be able to take positions on every bill in every issue area, so they try to help determine which ones are most likely to be the most impactful and most important. They oversee the legislative and team activity in the whole subject area, and they ensure appropriate training and supports available. And they work with position directors to evaluate the team's performance and also to sort of, identify areas where improvement might be helpful. Next, please. So this is what I sort of alluded to earlier. One of the things we've done recently is to help initiate new statewide interest groups whose purpose is to support each other in exploring advocacy and educational work related to California League advocacy positions and state issues relevant to those positions. So these groups allow members to share resources, to discuss policy, ask for help, organize educational events. And if you don't want to dive right into being a ledge analyst, or if there's already a ledge analyst in the particular area that you're interested in, this might be a great place to get started, being part of one of these interest groups. And the groups include housing and homelessness, healthcare, immigration, water, climate change, which I think is our longest standing interest group, headed up by Diz, and criminal justice reform. And in certainly sort of very narrowly defined circumstances and in very careful coordination with the state advocacy team and the relevant local leagues, interest groups may do some organizing, some advocacy, and some implementation work related to state legislative matters. Our volunteer area directors and the position directors from the advocacy team are members of each of these interest groups that are relevant to whichever position the interest group falls into. And they function as league state representatives to those groups. So they liaison with the state league to keep us informed as issues arise, and they help vet requests for action on legislation to ensure that the matters considered through that whole advocacy team structure. They sort of pull the interest of the interest group, in particular legislation, back into the advocacy team structure. That's how we sort of make sure that all that work is coordinated. Next slide, please. Okay, lobbying. So once we take a position on a bill, that's when Andrew and I start lobbying. I am the league's registered lobbyist, and Andrew Fisher is our public policy fellow. While that fellowship is actually about to end, he's going to continue to work on advocacy for us. We're not, and by the way, the fellowship doesn't end. We recruit, each year we recruit a new fellow, and we're about to start that process this year. We're not going to get into depth here on our lobbying activities. For that, I actually recommend that you take a look at our Under the Hood presentation that we recently did. They are slides that we will provide to you in a follow-up email so that you have an opportunity to take a look at that. Slides with talking points embedded that you can peruse at your leisure. What I will say is that most of our hands-on lobbying and testimony is done by our professional staff in order to avoid confusion and mistakes. It's not something that's done by our grassroots leaders and volunteers. Next slide, please. So the whole system is structured to make sure that people have an opportunity to be mentored and to learn, right? That's why we have the interest groups. It's why we have a supportive system of area directors and position directors. We're going to take questions on this section before our break, but after Andrew does his presentation on legislative process, which is coming up next. So let me turn it over to Andrew. Andrew, you're up.
Thanks, Dora. Just 1 second as I get all squared away here. Let me see. Okay. Sorry, I just saw a request for transcripts. Let me see if I can turn that on. Okay, got that on. So that should be popping up on your screen. Hi everyone, I'm Andrew Muse-Fisher. I am the current Trudy Schaefer Fellow for Public Policy. And tonight I'm going to be talking about, once I get on the right slide, the legislative process and how that works in California. So in other words, I'll be answering the question, how does a bill become a law in the state legislature? So I'm going to be going through a lot of information at a high level and very quickly. So I would encourage you to check out the binder that we sent out if you have any questions or if I gloss over anything too quickly, because we have a lot more in-depth resources in there. And that's a good place to learn about any and all of this related to how the legislative process. So this is the life cycle of legislation flowchart. We call it the placemat because it's a beast. It's huge, and it's kind of the only effective way to go through this process. Tonight I'm going to be going through most of these key steps that outline how a bill does become a law. So this is a good resource. It's in that binder that you have at the top. So it's a good reference, especially if you're getting started. As I go through the process, I'm going to try, or at least on my slides, I'll be highlighting the steps that we take on staff, the steps our volunteers might be taking, and key deadlines that are coming up as this process is going on, just to tie it back to the work that we do and to tie it with the legislative process. I mentioned the deadlines because timing is so important in this. Everything that we do in the legislature is deadline driven. Everything that they do is deadline driven. Because they work in 2-year sessions, starting in the odd, ending in the even, which means we've just entered the second year of the 2-year session. And in 2023, we're going to start a brand new one. And within each of those years, there are even more deadlines that bills need to meet in order to pass. So the very first step in the life cycle of a bill is with an idea. Each bill starts as an idea, maybe with a legislator, a member of their staff, an outside organization, maybe it's a constituent or a lobbyist or a business. There are so many people who pitch bills, bill ideas. Sometimes it's a copy and paste of a bill that was brought up in a previous cycle that didn't quite make it for whatever reason. And like I said, sometimes an org like the league will weigh in and pitch an idea to a legislator. From an idea, the bill, it's drafted into a bill by legislative council. Legislative council is the office that turns an idea, translates an idea into bill language. And if you want to learn more about legislative council and what they do, there is a more in-depth description in the binder. In the event that an org like the league has an idea and it's being turned into a bill, it still needs to go to legislative council for drafting, even if we provide draft bill language. It can't skip that step. And most of the time, it's a good idea to get their feedback and go through that process. And this process, when the league steps in to pitch an idea to try to get a bill, that's something that it happens only on our highest of priority bills, maybe 1 or 2 a year, if that really depends. So once a bill has been drafted by legislative council, it can be introduced, which is the first official step in its life cycle. So it can be introduced in either house of our legislature, either in the Senate or the Assembly, whichever branch the author is in. And when it's introduced, it gets a number, it has its author, and it has a subject, and it goes to first reading. The first reading is just one of 3 procedural readings And I'll talk about the other two later. And in the first reading, it's just announced essentially to the legislature. Once it's introduced, the bill goes to the all-powerful Rules Committee for policy committee assignment. So policy committees, I'm going to talk about that in a second. That's where the bill gets debated in more detail, but the Rules Committee gets to decide which ones it goes to, if any. Sometimes the Rules Committee will decide that they're going to hold a bill in their own committee, which kind of essentially stalls it or kills it, maybe for political reasons or whatever reason they might have. But hopefully it will get a committee assignment. So, like I said, policy committees are where legislators discuss the merits of a bill. Both the Assembly and the Senate have their own committees. A lot of them overlap. So you'll have your education committees, healthcare, health and human services, public safety, elections. There's a lot of them. I don't know them all off the top of my head, but they cover pretty much any topic under the sun. Since the start of the pandemic, most bills usually only go to one policy committee just to save time, but it can be more. For example, the League co-sponsored and passed a bill, AB 796 last year, which improved the voter registration process at the DMV. Because it dealt with voter registration, it had to go to elections committees. And because it dealt with the DMV, it had to go to the transportation committee. So there's an extra hurdle, an extra discussion that a bill needs to go through. So once it gets to the policy committee, the goal is to discuss the intent of the bill, figure out if it's going to actually achieve the goal as stated, and talk about any potential issues that might be within the bill. And it's discussed in usually roughly the same format in each policy committee. So firstly, the author, so a legislator who wrote the bill or who was carrying the bill, will present it to the committee, talk about why they decided to author it and why they support it. Then they'll invite maybe two expert witnesses or members of the public with compelling stories to provide long testimony. Long testimony is usually about 2 minutes of reasoning about why the bill deserves a yes vote. Then after that is the time for short testimony. So this is when members of the public, representatives from various organizations and lobbyists can come in and give a very formulaic position statement. So they'll say their name, their organization, or where they're from if they're not with an organization, and then their position. Any more than that, and then the committee chair will get upset and cut you off, cut the person off who's speaking. But it is a great opportunity for people to, members of the public, and to get involved. And this is something that we try to do for as many bills as possible. It's usually a member of staff who goes in and does that short testimony. And we also do long testimony on occasion, especially with bills like voting rights and other ones that are at the core of our making democracy or improving democracy work. So after the supporters go, the same thing happens, but with the opposition. You'll hear opposing testimony from expert witnesses potentially, and then members of the public as well. And then finally, it goes back to the committee. Members of the committee can discuss the bill. They can debate. They can ask questions of the witnesses and the author. They can go on their soapbox rants. They can get into a debate, you name it. So after all of that discussion for one bill, there's a few actions that a committee can take. They can pass it by a majority vote and send it to the next committee, whatever that might be. They can amend the bill and pass it. They can hold it in committee, which stalls the bill. They would do that if there's not enough support, if there are issues that haven't been worked out, or if it's just not a popular bill. In that case, the author can ask to have the bill reconsidered, and then hopefully spend that time either amending the bill to better shape or having conversations to bring on more support. A bill can also be passed on consent, and that means that it's pretty incontroversial. No one in the committee has raised objections, and the bill hasn't received a single no vote in any previous committee. So very popular bill, essentially. And the next step, if a bill makes it out of its policy committee or committees, is to go to fiscal committees. So if a bill costs any money or has a fiscal impact, and most bills do, it'll be referred to a fiscal committee. In most cases, it's the appropriations. I believe budget and revenue is also an option, but usually it'll be the appropriations committee. Both the Senate and the Assembly have their own appropriations committees. And they hold hearings similar to policy committee hearings, but the focus is much more on how much the bill will cost the state and why it's worth the expense. Many authors who are introducing or who have bills and appropriations they'll waive their hearing and instead opt to do some behind the scenes advocacy. And that's because the proceedings and appropriations are relatively opaque, especially in compared to policy committees where there's a lot of room for public input and more or less open dialogue. That's not quite the case in appropriations. So during appropriations hearings, many bills are placed on the suspense file, and that's just based on if their projected cost is higher than a specific threshold. It depends on where the money's coming from and if it's in the Assembly or the Senate, but that's usually $50,000 to $150,000. So if it's more than that, it'll be added to the suspense file. And that's not a lot considering how big California is and how big our annual budget is. So many bills end up on the suspense file. Bills that are placed on the suspense file aren't heard until the suspense hearing, which is usually just before the deadline to pass votes out of fiscal committees, out of appropriations. So there's could be a long time between learning that your bill goes to the suspense file and actually learning what happened to the bill in appropriation, what the decision was, because the appropriations committee needs to deliberate. They do so relatively privately, opaquely, to decide which bills to pass or hold or kill. And they make these decisions in part by looking at the draft state budget. It should be in a better shape usually in April, May. So they have a good sense of what kind of revenue is going to be available, maybe what the governor's priorities are going to be, and how much money they're going to be able to allocate based on what bills the legislature is trying to pass in a given year. They hold their decisions close until the suspense hearing. Legislators do have the chance to privately rank their bills by priority. Say, I have 20 bills. These are like my top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on, to express to the appropriations committees which ones they really want to pass and which ones they can potentially live without. This is also when orgs like the League might be sending letters to explain why we're supporting the bill. We might, for higher priority bills, we might also be doing some appropriations, trying to get appropriations on, or doing some lobbying to get appropriations on board. Most recently, we were working on passing the Racial Justice Act and working with the appropriations chairs and on that bill, and we're going to continue to do so. So finally, once they get to the suspense hearing, like I said, that's very late, right before the deadline to pass fiscal bills out of committee. It's done. They just go through probably several hundred bills at just about the same time, and they just announce the results. So they'll say AB 2 pass, AB 5 hold in committee, and it's kind of a bloodbath to watch because it's when a lot of bills you find out aren't going to make it that year or at all. So you might be understanding why they call it the suspense file. If a bill is lucky enough to go to get off suspense and to be passed out of appropriations or fiscal committee, then it goes to its second reading and then a floor vote. So the second reading is just a very procedural, as far as I know, very inconsequential step. And it's just to indicate that a bill has made it through all the committees it was supposed to. And now it's ready for the next steps. After the second reading, it goes to its third reading, which is definitely more consequential. So this is when the bill goes to a floor vote. And this is when the legislators all come together and they discuss a bill and debate it and then vote on it. This is a process that can take hours if the bill is very contested, or it can take a few minutes if it seems like there's a lot of support for it and it's a no-brainer. In this case, whereas in a policy committee, you have a lot of people from the public and other organizations coming in to weigh in. For the third reading for a floor vote, it's completely closed. It's only for legislators. So there's no room for experts to weigh in with testimony or provide for the public to voice or add a voice to the conversation, I should say. However, this is usually when advocates are doing some of their most intensive work. They're doing everything they can at this point to pass their bill because this is a very crucial stage. So they might be scheduling meetings with legislators. They might be sending floor alerts, which is just a kind of a bullet pointed list expressing the top level explanation of a bill and why it's important. They might be counting votes to see if their bill is going to pass, who else they might need, and see who else they might need to speak with. In some cases, advocates and lobbyists might be standing outside the doors of the chambers of the legislature just to try to catch them as they emerge, or they might be sending in cards through staff to ask legislators to come out to discuss some bills and try to get that last vote or two. It can definitely get pretty intense at this step. So if a bill does get approved by the House, it's in off a floor, a majority vote and a floor vote, then it has to go to the next House and do the exact same thing. So every step I just talked about, it has to do the same thing. So if it started in the Assembly and it passes, then it has to go to the Senate and vice versa. So there, like I said, there are a lot of steps to this process. It can, sorry, I'm just distracted by the chat. It can get a little bit easier the second time around because you know that a bill was at least popular enough to pass in the first House. It might have been amended into better shape to be more politically viable or to do what you're hoping it will do, whereas the original version might not have. And so in some cases, this is when we decide to take action on bills, whereas with our highest priority bills, it's always great to get in as soon as it's introduced, if possible. But when it enters the second House, it's also a good time because, like I said, it might have been formed into better shape, or there might be a more clear path to victory. It depends, and it's definitely very strategic. I also want to pause here just to talk very quickly about amendments. So amendments can happen at nearly any step that I've mentioned, in a policy committee, at appropriations before a floor vote. So it's important as a legislative analyst or member of the advocacy team to always be looking out for amendments that come through. And a good way to do that is by using LegInfo, which is a website curated by the state. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more depth in just a moment. And regardless if there are amendments, you'll likely hear from me just to check them out. So if a bill, if both the Senate and the Assembly pass a bill, they often have to send it back to the first one for a concurrent vote or a concurrence vote. So in some cases, a bill will pass through the Senate, for example, and then it goes to the Assembly, and then the Assembly amends it. So you have two separate versions of the bill. So you have to send it back to the first House to talk about or try to hash out those differences. And in some cases, if they can't hash out those differences, they have to create a conference committee. And this is where members of both houses of the legislature come together and try to find a version that works for everyone. If successful in this process, then the bill goes to the governor. So the governor usually has 12 days to sign a bill, or if it gets to the governor's desk on or after September 1st of this year at least, they have 30 days to sign it. And when a bill gets to the governor's desk, they have a few options. They can sign it and pass it into law. They can not sign it, but still let it pass into law. They can veto it, essentially rejecting it. They also have the option to line item appropriations within a bill. So that's just for fiscal elements. So if there's a cost attached to the bill that the governor doesn't like, they can nix that potentially. If a bill is vetoed, the legislature has a chance to override the veto with a 2/3 vote. But this is something that very rarely happens. If the governor does veto a bill, the legislature usually defers to their authority and the budget as well. So if they do override a veto, it's considered a pretty sharp rebuke. And once the governor signs it, if the governor signs it, then it goes to the Secretary of State to be chaptered. In terms of timing, a bill will generally go into effect January 1st of the following year, unless it has an urgency clause, which makes the bill go into effect as soon as it's passed and signed. But that only happens, bills with urgency clauses have higher thresholds to be passed, which makes them trickier to pass. So that is in a whirlwind, the various steps that a bill needs to go through in order to be passed. It was a lot. If you want to learn a little bit more, like I said, you can check out the binder. And before we dive into questions, I do want to pause here and kind of tie it back to the work that members of our advocacy team do. Because while all that's going on in the legislature, we're working in parallel to make sure that we can have the impact that we want. So the process generally starts with the triage. So staff works with area directors and position directors to search through bills that have been introduced in the legislature to see which ones we want to follow and maybe take action on, and try to sift through, because there are, I mean, thousands of bills that can be introduced. So it's hard to pick out the ones that are important to us, or at least worth watching. This year, February 18th is the deadline for bills to be introduced. And so after that, that's when we're looking at bills now, but that's really when we're gonna kickstart that triage process. And bills can come to us through other avenues. Often our partner organizations will reach out to us and say, we heard about this bill. Often we'll have legislators' offices reach out and say, we'd love to have the league take a position on this bill. So it's not all one avenue. The next general step is to follow a bill. So once we've looked through all the bills that are out there, we'll look at the ones that we want to keep an eye on. Maybe we will decide later on that we want to analyze them, or we just want to see if they're amended or how they fare in their various policy committees. It depends, but it's just generally keeping an eye to see how the bill progresses. After that, staff might assign out bills for analysis as they come to our attention. An analysis is undertaken only with the staff consulting the area director and the position director once we come to a consensus that a bill is in fact worth analyzing. And it makes sense that we should look at this in a bit closer, and as it relates to our positions. And just as a timing note, analyses are usually due the Friday before the second Thursday of each month. That's when the second Thursday is when our legislation committee usually meets, with some exception. And there's a more complete calendar with deadlines on the advocacy dashboard. And after a bill is analyzed, the legislation committee will vote on the bills that were analyzed in time, and reach a consensus, hopefully. In the case that the legislation committee does opt to follow the analyst recommendation, support, oppose, or some other position kind of in between, the next step is usually to send out a letter. And that's why, just to expedite the process, we usually ask our analysts to send in a draft letter when we get that original analysis. Just because, like I said, a lot of this is completely deadline driven. So if there's a policy committee hearing the week after the legislation committee vote, then we want to have that draft letter in hand so we can send it in, maybe get mentioned in the committee analysis, and make sure that they know where the league stands on a given bill. And then finally, after that, after the letter goes out and after we've determined that action we're taking on a bill that we have a position on, the next key step is to track amendments. And so it's always great when the legislative analyst is maybe subscribed to updates on Leg Info, keeping an eye on how the bill progresses through committee, and yeah, trying to get those updates. Regardless, when a bill is updated, analysts usually hear from me just to check in and see what's up. Because if there is an amendment, we want to know, do we need to update our letter? Do we need to see how this affects the position we take? And in some extreme circumstances, the bill will be amended beyond what we originally supported. So maybe it started out as like a water bill, but then now it's like about railroads or something completely different. In our original position that the legislation committee voted on just doesn't apply. So amendments often trigger action, if nothing else, just a review of how the bill has changed. So those are the key steps that volunteers will take. And I went through that pretty quickly as well. But yeah, we're gonna open it up to, I believe, yeah, some questions. We have I think if we're on time, we have just about 10-15 minutes for questions. And then after that, we're going to jump into a 10-minute break, just because this is such a long session. So I think I'll invite Gloria and Dora back.
Thank
And
you,
if you,
Andrew, for covering so completely a very complex process. I sometimes think what goes into Sacramento is so complicated. It's hard to always follow, and there are always deadlines. I've got a couple of questions, and I'm going to toss it to you, Dora. Does the league ever take neutral positions, and what happens when positions seem to conflict with one another? I could try to answer them, but Dora, I'd love for you to take those two.
Sure. We generally do not, I mean, to the extent that we take a neutral position, we just take no position at all. It's not an advocacy position one way or another. There's no real, legislators aren't moved by neutral positions. So really the answer is no. I mean, we may just go neutral on a bill in order to, that it may happen in a bill where there are reasons for us to support, but also some concerns related to the bill, and yet we want to sort of stand back and see how the resolution is negotiated by partners that have more expertise in the subject matter, for example. But it is not a formal position that we spend a lot of time thinking about. We're more focused on those bills that we can support, oppose, and really neutrality is simply our decision not to take a position. Was there another part of that question?
And then this happens, but rarely when we're dealing with, I don't know that we have positions that contradict one another, but sometimes we have some bills where a variety of positions. The one that I can think of, Dora, might be on the school finance facilities funding, where on the one hand, our education, higher ed folks obviously supported this bill because it would provide funding for facilities improvements. On the other hand, we had our state and local finance team look at it and say we have some concerns about the formula for allocating those funds. And so that is perhaps, and that does happen, right, Dora? And maybe speak a little bit more. They don't contradict, but they sort of fight one another, because we do have a strong.
And there may be circumstances where there is a frank contradiction. So, for example, between a state and local finance position and another policy position, there may be a concern that it doesn't make sense from a fiscal perspective, even if it is compelling from a policy perspective. And the way we handle that is by having the legislation committee, that's what they're there for, debate it out. And we have both positions represented by analyses, and sometimes if there's a very serious issue, we really need to hear more from the position director or from the legislative analyst, we invite them in to speak to us if there's something that's not clear from the papers. But it's in that sort of legislation committee context of debate that's a resolution is found if there is a problem. The matter on the school board, the facilities funding for educational facilities, for a very long time, because we support funding for educational facilities, we supported bond measures. And we decided recently to take a supportive amended position until we see a more equitable funding formula for those bond measures. And it was something that we hadn't done before, but decided that we finally had to, as a matter of fact.
And in that case, our opposition or our concerns were raised to high enough levels so that the league has been invited in. And some of our advocacy team members have actually worked with the legislator in terms of trying to refine that bill.
We're part of a coalition working to get amendments on the most recent bond measure.
Dora, let me ask you also to speak a little bit about the number of bills that are introduced every year. I know they're in the thousands, and how many we end up co-sponsoring, and how many, and you can talk about why some bills are referred to as being carried over.
So if you look at the under the hood presentation that we will send you, if you didn't have an opportunity to attend that, you can see that in the 2019 to 2020 cycle, so you can see a huge growth, first of all, in the number of bills that we're taking positions on. So back in 2011 to 2012, we took positions on 60 bills, okay? And we wrote 38 letters of support or opposition. And the letters are very important because the only way the legislator knows where you are, the only way your position is registered is if you actually file a letter on the matter. That's a very important way for them and the committee staff to factor in your position. Then if you jump from 2011 up to 2019, you see that in the 2019 to 2020 two-year cycle, we took positions on 147 bills. So, increasing enormously the number of bills that we were taking positions on, and we wrote 325 letters. Letters are updated and filed in each committee. We follow the bill through from soup to nuts. So what you see reflected in that 325 is that multiple letters are sent on one bill to ensure that our position is, registered all the way through. In the first half of the two-year cycle in 2021, we took positions on 68 bills and filed 236 letters. And I think it's likely we'll end up taking positions on about as many bills in the second year. So we're going to be on the same trajectory we were in 2019 to 2020. We actually are trying to be a little bit careful about not taking positions on too many bills, because once we stretch our resources thin, we believe that we're less effective. And we discussed that in the under the hood presentation.
Dora, if I might just stop, I think the question was how many bills total are introduced into the legislature, which are what, couple of thousand?
Well, there were 5,000 in the two-year cycle that went from 2019 to 2020. So it's actually about 2,500 bills each
per session. So, it's also important that we work on a two-year cycle. So we are now entering the second year of the two-year session.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why it's the term carried over means it carries over to the second session, right?
Yes. And then if it makes it, sometimes it
makes it, right. Like very many won't. And then the other question was how many urgency bills are there? Not a lot. I think we had a lot of urgency bills in the 2020 session because of the elections and COVID, right?
Well, there's always, I'm not sure, I actually can't answer the question, how many urgency bills. Obviously, the urgency bill is introduced, or the urgency clause is introduced. It's very important that the measure go into effect immediately, as opposed to waiting until January 1st when most laws go into effect. And it is used sparingly because it requires a 2/3 vote of the legislature. So it's not easy to pass an urgency bill. I have no idea how many.
And then Martha Beatty, who of course has been following a lot of bills in the government side, asked us to speak to the, sometimes you end up with a situation with a bill number, but almost no content. And I think she's referring to the gut and amend process. And yeah.
Oh no, I think you're probably referring, so there's a couple of things. There's spot bills that are legitimately introduced early on. If there's sort of if you want to hold space for a bill that you need some time to do more work on or to negotiate more. I actually just got a spot bill introduced so that we could have a policy bill in reserve in the event that we need it for something that we've been negotiating. That's common legislative practice. If you're not ready by the deadline, the Legislative Council needs language for bills by tomorrow. Even though the deadline to introduce the substance of bills is until February. And so if you're going to hit that Leg Council deadline, sometimes you need to hit it with a spot bill that is a sort of non-substantive change to the law that is pretty clear will be amended into something more substantive later on. The question about gut and amend is entirely, I think, different question. That's when you have a bill that you know is not going forward and you have another matter that you would like to legislate, you can amend that bill that the legislator knows is not going to be going forward, and capture it at the moment that it ends. So if you've got a bill that's gone through one house and is now in the second house, you can gut it and amend it with entirely new language. This is something that the league disfavors, because it means that the new language is not always going to go through the committees and be debated in committee in both houses the way that we believe that it should be. So we don't like those bills.
And then finally, Dora, though, there's a question about the number of bills that the league sponsors. And we don't sponsor a lot because it takes an awful lot, but we were very successful last year. So you might want to, for those who have not yet read the legislative wrap up, which goes to it extensively, and I would urge people to take a look at that. But Dora, you might just very quickly just talk about the two that we've sponsored last year.
So we try to keep it down to between 2 and 4. And I would recommend that you check out the legislative wrap up so you can read about the two that we sponsored last year, the Racial Justice for All Act, the one that will make the Racial Justice Act retroactive, and the other was a DMV bill that improves the voter registration process at the DMV, or will when it goes into effect. And many parts of it won't go into effect till 2025 for technical reasons. But those were the two that we focused on last cycle. I would like to say that even when we're not formally co-sponsoring a bill, there are bills that we work very hard on for amendments to improve the bill or to ensure that the bill is not damaging in some way, not problematic. And those are not co-sponsored bills, but they take just as much time as a co-sponsored bill. And we have been doing more and more of that kind of work. And you can read about that in the Under the Hood presentation.
I think we've covered most of the questions. There are a couple more that I don't think we have time for. We'll try to take a look at them and see if we could answer them at another time or maybe later on for the presentation. Right now, we're scheduled to take a 10-minute break. So we'll come back in 10 minutes from now. I think we're planning to reconvene at 7:20. We've given you a chock full of information. Please, you can go ahead and just stay on it. Leave your computer on, and the rest of us on the panelist team, we're just going to mute ourselves and turn our videos off, but stay tuned. We'll come back in 10 minutes. Thanks an awful lot, everybody.
Welcome back, all. I hope you had a chance to grab a glass of water, do a bio break, are a little bit refreshed and not too confused with all the information you've been receiving. We're gonna get back on stream. We spent the earlier session talking about advocacy with the league. We learned a little bit about the legislative process. Our next piece is to take a look at how the league does its legislative analysis, how we track and read a bill, and what the process is, and then following up later with how we actually do write a good analysis. So Dora, back to you and the intricacies of legislative analysis. Dora, I think you're muted. You may want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thanks. I've been answering questions, so now I have to get back into the mode of presentation. Okay, so this section on how to track and read a bill is very information dense, to the extent that the other sections weren't information dense. This one is even more. But as you will see, we have turned it into a sort of step-by-step process and provided lots of tools to help make it clearer. So if you printed out the worksheets that Andrew sent, this is a section that they apply to. And I saw somebody ask where the binder was. That was emailed to you in today's or yesterday's reminder email, I believe. But if you haven't printed them out, don't worry. Everything that you need to see is going to be up on the screen, so it's not really all that critical. Next slide, please. So this is the homepage of the advocacy dashboard that we built to house the materials we use for legislative analysis and advocacy. All the materials I'm referencing here today can be found in this dashboard. It's regularly updated with new materials, so keep checking it for updates. And the links that you're going to see here in little bit.lys at the top are included in the materials that Andrew emailed out yesterday. Next slide. There's even a recorded webinar to walk you through the dashboard step by step. So please take a tour to help discover all of its secrets, including things like a resource directory where we listed trusted sources for information about issue areas. You know, the resources that we put in there range from different advocacy organizations to state agencies to academic think tanks. It's a tool that we hope is going to be useful to onboard new team members. And perhaps for those folks who are part of our interest groups, and help them learn more about the issue areas. It's also going to help with researching the background of subject matter in bills. Next slide, please. The dashboard section called Advocate has most of the materials we're going to focus on here. The first thing in Advocate is a comprehensive legislative analysis checklist to use as you read and analyze bills. And right next to it is a downloadable form that you can use to write up your analysis. Next slide, please. So the first things first, on legislative analysis, don't worry, you've got a checklist, right? Seriously, everything is in your checklist. I'm not going to be able to go over all of it today, but I am going to review how you can get started with bill analysis. And then after I do that, Susan Rice, who's our area director for social policy, she's going to offer some tips for writing a strong analysis that she wrote up for us and something that she calls the Goldilocks guidelines. What I'm going to talk about ties in with the legislative process that Andrew just discussed. I don't want you to look at your checklist as we do this, even if you printed it out. Just rest assured that what we're discussing now, it is covered there. Next slide, please. So these are the topic headings for the checklist, right? You've already heard about speaking with one voice and league positions, so not going to go over those again. I am going to give a quick overview of tracking bills online and reading bills. And then Susan Rice, like I said, is going to provide tips for writing a good analysis. Slide. At your leisure, you can check out our recorded advanced webinar on our online dashboard on legislative analysis. It provides much more in-depth exploration of how to analyze legislation than what I'm going to be able to offer here today. Next slide. Now, this is the newly revamped California State Legislature's homepage. page. As you can see, it provides the day's legislative schedule. That's going to let you know when times are for committee hearings, floor sessions, things like that. The bill information category here will let you search for a bill. And that's the page that we're going to focus on in the next slide. You can also access the entire legislative code here, California code from here, the legal code. So every law that exists in California can be accessed from this site. And over to the right-hand side, there's quick links to video archives so you can watch hearings and floor sessions, which is extraordinarily useful if you're following a bill. And you can subscribe for updates on bills, which I'll explain more about it in just a minute. Next slide. Okay. When we assign you a bill to analyze, or when you're interested in checking out a bill, the first place you go to is bill information. Next slide. Once you click bill information, this page will come up. Sure. Yeah, thank you. I'm looking for the bill search page. Yep, that's it. This page comes up. I typed in AB 1416, which we're going to use as an example for this part of the presentation. Next slide, please. Great. When you enter a particular bill into the search tool, this is the page that comes up. The bill number and the title is at the top of the page. The text of the current version of the bill is immediately available. And there are a variety of options to choose, like getting earlier versions of the bill, finding out the bill's votes, its history, things like that. Over to the right, there's a link to track bill. Thank you. So if I click track bill, this is what comes up. And you can register to track the bill, or you can log in if you've already created an account. Next slide. Now, once you've logged in to track the bill, this notification points page comes up. This is how ledge analysts follow the progress of their bills, by clicking the relevant boxes and signing up to be notified by email at certain points in the bill's life cycle, right? It's pretty straightforward, but I want to show you how to navigate it. So in a moment, I'll show you an easier to read screen with this information. I know it's really hard to see this. Once you sign up, you're going to be alerted so that you can check amendments, you can adjust your analysis, and you can let us know if there should be a change of position, right? You may also want to update the advocacy letters you write if there are substantive changes that shift our arguments. So remember, we send in updated letters as the bills move through the process. So for policy committees and fiscal committees in both houses, and then sometimes for any targeted legislators when the bill goes to the floor, and of course the governor to urge signature or veto sometimes. Next slide, please. Okay. So you see here the points at which you can choose to be alerted. Let's just go through the notification points quickly. Across the desk is an alert that a committee referral recommendation has been made. You usually see that after the bill has been first introduced, but new committee referrals could actually come up at any time. So for example, a bill may initially be referred to a housing committee, and then an amendment's made that requires it to also be considered by natural resources. That's why a committee referral might pop up in the middle of the cycle. To committee is an alert that the bill has been referred to a Senate or Assembly committee. The measure set for hearing, that's going to tell you the hearing date, the time, the place, which by the way, you can either watch live or record it. These days, they prefer that you not show up in person due to COVID restrictions, and they prefer that you watch it online. Amended is an alert that the bill has been amended by the author or on the floor. And by the way, one of the reasons for second reading is to allow for the amendment process to move forward on an interim basis. After bills have gone through their committees in one house, the legislature might want an opportunity to amend them. That sometimes happens on second reading. Floor results will let you know whether the bill has passed or not, or if it's been moved to an inactive file or a special consent calendar. as Andrew spoke about, or if it was returned to the other house. Enrolled is an alert you'll get if and when the bill is sent or enrolled to the governor, if it's approved or vetoed or returned at the request of either house. And then final result is going to let you know the bill's chapter number, if it failed or died in committee, or if it died pursuant to a constitutional timing rule, which definitely happens, just happened to a bunch of bills. Next slide, please. Now, what if you want to know a bill's history? Well, you just click through to the history. Next slide, please. Now, here is a clear depiction of what you get when you look at the bill history. This is actually the history of a different bill. It's not AB 1416, but I chose it because it's more interesting. Remember your life cycle of bill presentation from Andrew here. Now, on February 16th, the bill was read the first time, right? That's the first formal introduction of a bill, but the first reading is actually quite anticlimactic. What it usually means is that on the floor of the House, the clerk assigns the bill a number and reads the name of the author and a descriptive title, and that's it. Then they send the bill to the Office of State Printing. No bill can be acted on until 30 days has passed from the date of its introduction, and that's why they have the March 19th date here, right? It's a little bit more than 30 days, I guess, after the introduction. There may have been a week in there. The bill is then referred by the Rules Committee to a standing committee for future hearing. And here it's double referred to elections and local government committees, right? Now, this bill is getting amended along the way. And remember, each time it gets amended, our legislative analyst is reviewing those amendments and letting us know if there should be reconsideration of the bill. And this bill is having a very easy time of it, right? It has passed out of both policy committees with unanimous votes. By May 9th, it's out of appropriations on a unanimous vote. Very unusual, likely means it carries no significant costs. And on May 10th, it's read a second time and it's placed on the consent calendar, which is, as Andrew described, a list of bills where there's unanimous agreement to pass with no dissenting votes along the way. Now, any member can pull a bill off consent. If a consent item is to be amended, it has to be pulled off consent. But consent items will not be heard, but will be voted out as a package because there's such consistent uniformity in supporting it. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's get to the nitty gritty of how to read a bill. And I know Andrew's going to try to let me take control. This might take a moment for me to sort of get my head around of the slides. So here we click text to get started. And remember, we want to check all the different versions of the bill, which you can do by clicking through the drop-down menu of versions over to the right side. Okay, so next slide, please. And this is where my, yeah, he's giving me control. Okay, let's see if this works. So now, okay, before COVID times, we did this in a very interactive way. It was a lot more fun. But so we've provided you with an annotated copy of the bill. That was part of the worksheets that we suggested you might want to print out if you had an opportunity. So don't worry about taking notes because you do have that in your email. If you've printed out the annotated copy, then it might help to have it out next to you as we go through this. Since it's hard to do an interactive version online, I'm just going to walk you through the various elements of the beginning of a bill. So first of all, very important to know that there's a lot of important information right at the beginning of a bill, right? There is, see, Andrew. Okay, this took a moment. There is the House where the bill was introduced. It's going to show there either the Senate or the Assembly. This is an Assembly bill. The bill number is 2880, and that's the order in which it was put across the desk or formally introduced by the Assembly member who's the author. Some legislators will wait for a particular number if it's relevant to their bill, like, I don't know, 420 if it has something to do with legalization of marijuana. And sometimes it's just luck of the draw. They just get whatever they get. Now, AB 2880 was introduced on February 16th, 2018, right? Assemblymember Harper, who was the Republican vice chair of Assembly Elections, the Assembly Elections Committee at the time, is the primary author of the bill. And Assembly members Steinforth and Mullen, they both sat on the Assembly Elections Committee with Harper. They are co-authors. Senator Allen, who was a prominent Democratic member of the Senate Elections Committee at the time, he's also listed here as a co-author. So those roles are interesting to note when you look at a bill, because it means that Assemblymember Harper was methodically lining up support both among Dems in his committee, which he needed, right? Because he was in the minority. He was a Republican, which is in the vast minority in California, in the legislature. And also in Senate elections. You know, he went right over to Senate elections and he lined up an author early on. It was amended 3 times during the second year of the 2017 to 2018 legislative session. The red and blue, the red and strikeouts means deleted text, and the blue italics means that the text has been added. You get the color here, but sometimes you just get the strikeouts and italics, so you need to know what they mean. You can see that this version started out repealing 3 code sections and adding 1, but it ended up being structured to repeal 2 and add 1. All the basic point I want to make is that all of this information at the beginning of the bill will really tell you quite a bit, and you need to pay attention to it. Okay, now this text is pulled from the annotated version of AB 2880 that I sent out. It's part of the Legislative Council's digest that appears before you get to the language of the bill itself, right below the material that we just went over. The Leg Council is the public agency that drafts legislative proposals, prepares legal opinions. They provide other confidential legal services to the legislature. They're the legislature's attorneys. The Leg Council's digest is a summary of existing law and proposed changes. Now, it's really important to realize that while this is a very useful thing to have at the beginning of every bill, it can be incomplete, and sometimes it's even inaccurate. So as leg analysts and position directors, it's extraordinarily important to make sure that you read the whole bill, that you don't just depend on the digest. And here you see that the Leg Council updates its digest to reflect the amendments being made along the way with the red and the blue. You can also see that AB 2880 has something to do with local enforcement of the Political Reform Act, which regulates campaign financing, conflicts of interest, lobbying, government ethics. In fact, AB 2880 is a bill that authorizes local governments to contract with the Fair Political Practices Commission to administer and enforce local campaign finance laws, because they have so much expertise in that area. That's what the bill does. So now in your annotated version, if you haven't happened to print it out, look down at the end of the Leg Council's digest at the bottom of the page. Those notes, right, those notes, the ones I just flew the arrow to, at the bottom saying vote, appropriation, fiscal committee, and local program, they all reveal a lot about them. So most bills require a majority vote to pass. This one requires a 2/3 vote. Your checklist notes all of the reasons that a bill might require a 2/3 vote, or in some cases a 4/5 vote. Constitutional amendments require 2/3, urgency bills require 2/3. Any bill that amends the Political Reform Act is required to have a 2/3 vote to pass. Appropriation, it's not an indication, and this is a common source of confusion. It's not an indication as to whether or not the bill will go to the Appropriations Committee for consideration. It's actually an indication that the bill itself will allocate some amount of money inside the bill. Something that I honestly haven't seen too much of. Fiscal committee will be noted as yes, if the bill allocates money or if it affects state spending. And the 2 fiscal committees are appropriations, which you've heard a lot of discussion about tonight, and the budget committee. State mandated local program is going to be noted as yes, where the state is required to reimburse local governments for activities that are mandated by the legislation. There are exceptions to local reimbursement requirements, and that's actually discussed in more detail in resources that I cite within that checklist. When analyzing the bill for us, all we really want you to think about when you see local program yes, is whether a local government appears to be provided with sufficient means to accomplish the bill's requirements, or does it not. We don't have the capacity or the expertise to really get too deeply into this issue, but we do want to know if the bill does not appear to address the problem or the issue at all. Like if there's no mention of resources being made available. We don't ask you to analyze the issue too deeply, just to flag it if there seems to be a problem, and we can look at it a little bit further. Let's see. Okay. So there's just one last thing I want to show. With each successive amended draft of the bill, you lose the blue italics and the red strikeout on an amendment once an amendment has been adopted by a committee or on the floor, right? So new text will suddenly appear in normal type on the next version, even though it's not part of the existing statute. And old text, sometimes including very important elements of the law or the bill, they may disappear completely, right? Here, if you only looked at this June 12th version of the bill, you might think that before approving an agreement for local reimbursement, the commission that's referenced here was always required to consult with the Department of Finance, because it appears to amend original text that reads, before approving an agreement for local reimbursement, the commission shall consult with the Department of Finance, right? But in fact, when you look back at the June 6th amendments to the bill, that clause had only been added a week earlier, right? So if you really want to understand how the bill is evolving and developing and how it's changing current law, it's critical to check all versions of the bill to make sure that we understand the changes that have been made to the law during this whole process. So this may seem like a lot, it is a lot, but it gets a lot easier after the first few bills that are analyzed. We're here to help. As I've said before, your position director would be here to help, your area director is here to help, and your checklist is going to be a very handy tool in this process. Bottom line is that you can make a really significant impact on the lives of Californians with this kind of work. And because what we do here in the state is very often a model for reforms in other states, your work can have real legs, right? And impact the whole country. Now, with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Susan, who's going to provide some practical tips about how to write good analyses. And Andrew, yeah, you can take back control.
Thanks, Dora. And it's a pleasure to be on with Dora and Andrew and Gloria. And I'm so glad we have Carol and Helen as our resources. Next slide, please. I have an overview of what I'm going to talk about. I hope to finish in less than 20 minutes. I know that you're all tired. I also know that many of you have been doing legislative analysis for a long time, and some of you have never done it. And some of you are like me, you've been doing it for a couple of years. And so I have tips. I don't always do it the best way, but I try it, and I know you can too. So we're going to talk about what is a legislative analysis the league way, and a little bit about framing your mind for doing it, the importance of starting early, and then what happens after you submit, and then the Goldilocks guidelines that Dora mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. So this is the form, and basically you fill out the form. Dora pointed out to you a minute or two ago when we went to the advocacy dashboard, and the form, as you can see, asks your name, the date the bill was first introduced and the author, the date that you're writing it, and that's really important, the date the bill was introduced, an amendment, and so on, and then the league positions. It asks you to say what the present law is. It asks you to define what the bill is, and then the arguments. And if you go to the California Legislative Information page that Dora was showing you in detail, you will find that it says the present law, and it defines it, and the bill. And of course, you're not going to want to copy the whole thing, but you can use it. It's very, very helpful. But when you get to the argument, that is when you address the league position. Let's see if there's anything else I wanted to cover. This form is really the basis for advocacy. It's the basis that the league uses for the words in letters. It's the basis for news articles. And it's the basis for almost everything else that's said about the bill. It is the foundation. It is the recommendation to the legislation committee. And as you've already heard, the legislation committee makes the decisions on the bills unless it's a ballot issue. And so it's really important that you think about what that legislation committee is composed of and how they think, because that's your market. That's who you're writing to. When the analysis is completed, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it in a minute, the legislation committee needs a draft letter to be accompanied with it, because sometimes there's a hearing within a day. And we want that letter, if the league does decide to take a position, we want that letter submitted right away. The beauty of the letter, in particular, if the bill is so clearly written and the league can take a position early on, is that then the league is listed in the staff analysis that accompanies every single hearing that is shown in the California Legislative Information. And for those legislators who aren't reading all of their mail, they can see in the staff analysis that the League of Women Voters has taken a position on it. On the other hand, you don't want to get a draft letter in early, or you don't want to write an analysis early if the bill really doesn't address what we need it to be done. Next slide, please. So, framing your mind before you begin. I think I've already emphasized how important it is to be objective and clear, succinct and thorough. The form for about a year said, keep it to one page. Now there's an understanding that sometimes you can't keep it to one page, but it is really important to be succinct. Most writers means that they do a draft and then they have time to reflect, and they need to do some more rewriting and editing. The legislation committee is composed of some board members and the area directors. Some have never been involved in an area that you might be involved in. They love league, they know how the league thinks, but they need it to be very clear and succinct. So, and don't expect them to call you and say, what did you mean by this? Or email you. The analysis should do this. The legislation committee meets for 1 hour. Sometimes they have 20 bills on 5, 6, 7 different positions. They get them early. Most committee members read it 2 and 3 times. They make notes. They'll go back and forth a little bit with each other, but basically, and then they have an hour to make a decision. Next slide, please. So part of the framing your mind is that it's really important to connect the league position with the bill and be specific. And on this slide, it shows some of the aspects of our league position on policing practices. And as you can see, 2 of the aspects of it are bulleted. But if you're writing a bill analysis, you don't want to repeat the whole thing. You want to be selective in saying, this bill addresses part of our position that the league thinks is important. And you snip it. You do a sentence or a half sentence. And then the beauties of the internet, then you just provide the link. So for those who really want to go into it more, they can. But you've done the work of figuring out on all of these positions which parts the bill really addresses. The form, as you saw, asks you to identify the positions. And if you've noticed it, it had position 1, 2, 3, 4. It may not be 4, but that's not enough. The legislation committee really needs to see that. Many times the league positions are the result of a 2-year study, and the position has been readopted every 2 years. So you have to remember that these positions are almost carved in stone. So the position of the league on their particular area, which I usually talk about social policies, whether it's housing or homelessness or higher education or children or juvenile justice or criminal justice, the league position is the basis for your analysis. So as much as you might love all sorts of other aspects of it and are passionate about how important it will be, it's how it connects to the league position. And furthermore, the league position has some things about local government and financing and who's financing it. So oftentimes a bill that's going to change the world also addresses some of these other positions we have. And in fact, that's an example of what I just said, that a bill can address more than one position. And so that gets me to, next slide, please. Starting early. Because what if the bill you discover, because you read it quickly early on, you discover that it addresses 2 or 3 positions that you think we have. And so you need to think about, does it go back to another analyst? Ask the office, ask Dora or Andrew whether it should go back to another analyst, or consult your position director and let the position director decide. Should the finance position director write an analysis, or whether it's minor and maybe it could be done by you. You can have a housing thing, but you can also have a land use. You can have a housing thing and have it address climate control. You can have what, and so on and so on. So the reason for starting early, again, is that it may address a couple positions. That means that your position director may want to look at it, and guess what? They've got other things going on in their lives, and they may not be able to get back to you for a day or two. And when they do, they may ask you questions that means that you need to do some more homework. Then furthermore, if you need to have it reviewed by your area director before it's submitted, they too may need more than 2 days. So it's another point of starting early. The form, if you noticed it when you get it, or if you haven't looked at it, I think at the bottom, it asks you to mail it to or send it to your position director and your area director. So starting early. Next slide, please. So after you submit it, what happens? Well, right away, the league position, the legislation committee's decision is posted on the public league site. And then in addition, all the other bills that the legislation committee didn't take a position on, but is watching, or that's the phrase I use, it's listed in the bill status report. The bill status report list for the bills that we don't have a position on are not listed publicly. They're on what I call the My League Only page. And it's all tied into the program part of the website. And then, as Dora mentioned, after you've submitted the bill, then you have to keep track of it. I was doing a bill this past year that we don't have an analyst for, and so it was up to me. And I asked for tracking with the California legislature information. and went through the assembly, zip, 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 after 3 committees. And then it sat waiting in the Senate, and I had to keep track of it. And it's hard to find information. Each committee had an analysis, but after it left one house and hadn't gone to the other, it was kind of like, where do I find the information? So you're the best person to find that out. Let's see. The other thing I want to mention is, don't be surprised if the legislation committee doesn't take a position on the bill. Maybe new things have come about. Maybe the league is working with a different organization in a coalition on the bill, and Dora has learned something about what's going on. And all of that has to do with maybe we should delay. If they're going to add an amendment, don't we want to see that first? And so on. So don't be surprised. Usually you can find out right away what's happened with the bill. So it should be on one or the others. So the next slide is addressing the Goldilocks guidelines, which we put together a year or two ago. And as you can see from this page, it shows where it is. It's tools and more tools to help decode and analyze bills. The Goldilocks guide is an outline of some fabricated bills that we made up. And they're just kind of examples of things you can think about as you're writing it. So if we go to the next slide, please. So here's a bill that addresses the importance of food products being sourced locally. What could be better, right? The legislative analyst says food provision is not addressed by any league position and turns it in. That is not helpful, right? The bill must have been directed to the analyst to say, hey, that looks like there's some league thing here. So let's go to the next slide, please. Here's an example of it's too long. So what I've highlighted here is the analyst is saying the bill should be reviewed by legislative analysts from the perspective of many different positions, water, local government, and so on. But putting this in the legislative analysis when you're submitting it, it's too late. As we've talked about before, you need to get it off to another legislative analyst before. And if it addresses water, if it addresses urbanness, if it addresses school districts, those are all significant other things besides food. Okay, let's see. Did I cover everything that I thought about? Yeah. Okay, next slide. Please, thank you. Oh, some more examples of how it's too long. There isn't any citation, no reference to the league position. And then the helpful suggestions, as I said, should have come early on before an analysis was even written. Next slide, please. So here's the just right one. It addresses what the bill is doing in one sentence. In the second sentence, it says what the bill would do. It addresses an education issue. So then it cites the league position. It's highlighted, so you can go to the link to read the whole thing if you want. But if you don't, you read that the state and local districts have program design responsibility and implementation for children in the schools. So it gets into the issue of, is the state going to tell the local school district how it's going to behave on every single thing, including providing food at lunch? So there we have something. And then as you can see, there's also a position on intergovernmental relationships and who's in charge and how they are supposed to work together. So that is my final slide on the Goldilocks guidelines. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you for your active participation. And just like me, I've only been doing this for a couple of years. I'm still learning, and so will you.
Thank you so much, Susan. I really appreciate that. Love it. Not too little, not too much, and just right. So we've got the floor open for questions, and just wanted to note that we've gone through a lot of materials. It may take you some time to think and have this all sink in as you think about what was being said. And we've given you some links so you can go back and study some of the more detailed material that is available online. When we said there's a binder, it's not a physical binder, of course. It is a link to a lot of materials that if we had met in person, we might have printed out and put together in a binder. But in this day and age, and consciousness about not wasting materials and paper, I think it's very good to just know that it's available. Well, I've learned an awful lot. I'm going to ask Dora to join me, and then Susan, if you'll stay on, if you've got any more questions. I'm going to do a quick peek. Okay. I just want to emphasize one other piece. the reason we spent a lot of time, and Susan did, on how to write a good analysis is because the legislation committee has a very short amount of time to cover a lot of bills. And so the foundation for all we do is that ledge analysis that is written. It is the foundation for all that we do, because a good analysis will be very clear. Most of the time, I would say probably 90% of the time, we support and go with the recommendation of legislative analysis, assuming that we've got all the information we need, it's clear, it's where we know exactly what it is the bill will do and why we should take action. The other piece I want to emphasize, I think, is that we do not take action or review a whole lot of bills. We're fairly selective. So go back to what Dora said earlier on about the criteria for bill selection. Okay, now I'll try to, I saw a few of the questions earlier. And one that is sort of in general, this really has to do with questions that were asked before the break. Okay, I'm getting something from Andrew. Yes, right. Andrew will send you the link, but all the materials referenced will be sent to you so you can link and have all that materials on hand. I'm going to ask Dora this question, and perhaps we can all join in. Does the league do budget advocacy? Because we get often asked to, this bill is going before the Appropriations Committee. We need to stand up and support it. But there's a reason we don't often do advocacy on at the Appropriations Committee level or on budget issues, except primarily on the good government issues. Dora, do you want to chime in on that and add anything else on that?
I can, but Helen had a really good answer that she provided in the chat in written form. I wonder whether she wants to come off mute and explain why we rarely do budget advocacy.
Sure. We rarely do budget advocacy because we have so many positions that when we advocate for the budget for one area, say for libraries, which we think need full funding, that might mean that then the money wouldn't go to schools, which we also think needs full funding. And so it becomes a competition among various areas, all of which we think need full funding. So we advocate for the bigger pie, the general, that we need more money in the whole system because all of these services should be funded.
The one exception to that is elections. We will sometimes dive in on budget advocacy related to voter education and outreach, for example, on other things related to elections. Like I think at one point we perhaps did some advocacy before my time on the kinds of machines that California uses for voting machines and funding them. And right now, in fact, we are engaged, we're leading a group of people who are advocating for more money to be spent just for the next couple of election cycles to deal with the fact that we have moved to universal mailing of ballots and to ensure that proper education is done related to the options that people have. We are not moving to all vote by mail elections. That there's a misunderstanding out there about that. We still have the option to vote in person, and there are many ways to return a vote by mail ballot if one wants to use that vote by mail ballot. So we want to, and we're very concerned that if this education is not done properly and with community-based organizations being engaged in it, that we're going to end up leaving behind people who are already underrepresented in the electorate and who may have either a desire or a need to vote, for example, in person, where they can get language assistance, they can get assistance if they have disabilities, that sort of thing. That is unusual for us, but it's very specifically tied to our main mission related to voting rights.
There's one comment or question about will LWVC provide any guidelines for advocacy on SB 9 and on its implementation. And I think I'll just try to respond to that. We have a very active housing and homelessness committee, and perhaps they will work on some implementation recommendations, just as our criminal justice committee or interest group now, our criminal justice committee provided a number of guidelines for implementation of the Racial Justice Act and for how to use the criminal justice position in local advocacy. So perhaps we will see something out of the housing committee. But at this point in time, There's nothing that we've put together, but that might be the work that could come out of our all volunteer housing and homelessness task interest group, and hoping that some of them are listening and might participate in that request. I don't see any other.
There was one other question. There were a lot of questions about the budget and budget trailer bills. It's too much to get into now, but there are a lot of it. We put in a lot of educational material about the budget, including information that has been generated by the California Budget and Policy Center, which is sort of a preeminent group doing this work, educational work about the budget, on our advocacy dashboard under the Learn section. So if you go there, you'll see that there's quite a lot of material to check out.
There was an earlier question I didn't have a chance to ask. What happens when a coalition partner that we've been working with changes their position? Dora, do you want to say that? I mean, first of all, we work with many coalition partners. We don't agree with them on everything,
Yeah.
but maybe this is about a specific bill.
Well, it just depends. I mean, sometimes we might change our position for the same reasons that they do, and sometimes we disagree with them.
Yeah, and we've been known to disagree with our, people, organizations like Common Cause and ACLU that we almost always are inconsistent with, but we have sometimes different views, different reasons. I think the other question is, what do you do? Because some people believe that the league is biased or considered too liberal. Well, I don't know. Anyone want to address that? I have some thoughts about that. Susan, do you want to try that, or Carol? Perhaps Carol out there. This is always going to be a controversy.
I get asked that a lot. I would say, first of all, the league, when it comes to advocacy, is an issue-based organization. We do not start our analysis with what a political party says or doesn't say about this. We have our own opinions about things. And those opinions are based on the study and the consensus that we talked about earlier in this session. So it's great if they happen to agree with us, but that is not the beginning or the end of any analysis we ever do. I will also point out, women voting was kind of a progressive idea. So, just bear that in mind too.
And our positions state about the world or government and how we operate as what we think will make for a better world. And so our positions reflect our desire to make things better. And that's simply the way it is. There was another question, Catherine Garvey, asking about using LWV US positions. Oh, absolutely, yes. No question. So many of the very broad-based positions that come to us are nationally. Our meeting basic needs has got to be one that we almost always use, and privacy. These are all national positions. And it's sort of we're a big house in which our foundations are very large, and the strong foundations, we have our national positions, which are very strong, and we also have very strong state positions. And I hope your local league will also have some strong local positions as well, based again on study and research. It's hard for me to sort of go back.
Susan Guilford gave a great answer about league being too liberal. She likes to point out that by the time the redistricting measure reached the ballot, it was opposed by both political parties.
Sometimes that's a good sign when both political parties have disagreed with us, and I think that's fine. And every so often, hey, we've agreed with the Jarvis. I think there was one bill, interestingly, or ballot measure that both the league and Jarvis agreed on. I can't remember what it was, but so we're not tied to any political group or any political position. We do what we feel is right based upon our positions. Well, we've had a long night. I don't see any other major questions. Or any closing comment?
Susan Riqua mentioned that she didn't feel that the information being provided here was in plain language, the way Voter's Edge and Easy Voter Guide are, for example. But this seminar is for a very different purpose. It's for our legislative analysts and for people who want to be a legislative analyst. And while it's true that it's perhaps not in the most approachable language, it's intended to be a wonky presentation on wonky subjects. So
yeah, and I think based upon what it is you're trying to deal with, we're dealing with the legislature. we're dealing with language that is used by the legislature. And the other piece is it takes a while to get around this. I've been doing this now at the state level for a number of years, and I even learned from Dora, your presentation today, constantly learning how to use the Ledge Info system. There's so much, actually, thank goodness in California, for the most part, the league has pushed for, along with many other groups like the league, like ACLU and Common Cause, we've been pushing for more transparency so that a lot of the material that is now available. And actually, California is so far ahead of many other states in terms of having that requirement that we just don't have these quick decisions being made behind closed doors, and that they're so much more transparent. So finding that is not an easy process, but we're getting better and better at it. And our ledge analysts are taking on the tough task of following this legislation. And I will say the language is what it is. It's legalese. It's written by the legislature, and it's our job to try to clarify it and to understand it. And I will say that I feel like I'm going for a PhD when I go through some of the material that I've gone through. Again, many, many thanks to all of you. It's been a long night, but good information. I hope you found it useful and helpful. It may take some practice on your part to go through it. And that's all I have to say. Dora, any other closing comments, or Carol or Helen? Susan?
Thank you all for attending. It's been extraordinary turnout.
And we hope we might find some new analysts out there as well who are intrigued enough and will want to join us in this long
Contact
but
me.
important. Go ahead, Susan.
I said, if you want to be a legislative analyst in the social policy area, contact me.
And
Carol wanted to
let me
say
add something to this as well. Someone asked in the question and answer, could they use this for their local advocacy when it comes to analysis of local ordinances? Absolutely. That legislative format, the analysis format that Susan went through, gives you an analytical framework and helps walk you through those steps. And you may be using different positions, but you may be using the same ones we are. And it absolutely gives you sort of a way of working methodically through an analysis to help you and your leagues understand what an ordinance is, what the proposal is, and if you want to support it or not.
Yes, and it's a very clarifying way to look at something. The Ledge Committee just met last week, and I want to say a hats off to Jen C out there, because I think Jen's out there, but she wrote an incredibly very clear analysis of some legislation that's being proposed on criminal justice reform with regard to how police and law enforcement uses biometrics and facial recognition. But that was one of the clearest and for a very complicated issue with great resources. That was just absolutely intriguing. So this is the stuff we generate. This is what's important. Before we leave, I do have one more slide, and that is I would like to thank you all, not only for being here, but just remember that we are at the cutting edge of defending democracy, and the work we do is so very important. We're under great threat. Democracy is misunderstood, not often having the priority that it needs, and the League is doing all it can to keep making democracy work. And just want to have you all consider making a donation at some point in time to the League of Women Voters, so that we can continue our very, very important work. And we count on you to help support the movement. So thanks so much, everybody. Have a great night, and stay tuned. Look forward to hearing from you. Bye now.